Hello, this is Paul Chek, and I would love to welcome you to a couple of workshops I'm going to be putting on in October here at the Chek Institute in Vista, California. The first of which is the Science of Breathing and Movement, a one-day workshop. That is October the 29th, 2010, here at the Institute in Vista, California. The next day, October the 30th, 2010, I will run Scientific Balance Training as a one-day workshop. You can register for these workshops at chekinstitute.com, or you can call the numbers on your screen. While I've got a moment here with you, I'd like to share the learning objectives and just a few key tidbits to give you an example of what you can learn here at these workshops. So let's have a look. The learning objectives for the Science of Breathing and Movement are to understand the basic function and physiology of respiration. Next, we want to understand the anatomy, biomechanics, and kinesiology of the respiratory system, so we really understand how it works. How do all the joints move? What's happening with breathing? And since breathing is the most primary function in the body, then it would be logical to consider the influence that breathing may have over joint mechanics and your entire physiological systems, and how might that impact on an exercise or on movement at large. We will look at how the respiratory system influences both the axial skeleton and the extremities by either exciting or inhibiting agonists and antagonists. So with that key point alone, you can see how that might be real critical to understand when teaching or performing exercise or movement at large. We'll learn practical techniques for assessing respiratory function. We'll practice some highly effective methods for restoring optimal respiratory mechanics. We'll explore how to improve performance during commonly used rehabilitative and conditioning exercises by effectively integrating optimal respiratory mechanics with the various exercises or movements. And we'll discover how to determine when breathing should be maintained with movement versus when breathing should be modulated to improve stability in the musculoskeletal system for optimal health and performance. For example, though the diaphragm is primarily a breathing muscle, its secondary function is as a stabilizer muscle. So if there are situations in which we need more stability to protect the joints and the nervous system, we naturally need to stop breathing and use the diaphragm as a stabilizer muscle. But how long can you do that before you actually create stress in the system? And if you do it too frequently, you may challenge the heart. So I'll show you a number of ways you can use the respiratory system to improve stability or mobility depending on what it is that your goal or objective with the movement or the therapeutic technique is. We'll look, for example, at how the respiration functions or the respiratory system mobilizes cerebral spinal fluid to nourish and remove metabolic waste from the central nervous system. We'll look at how respiration provides oxygen for cellular metabolism. We'll look at how the respiratory system maintains the acid-alkaline balance, or is one of the key factors involved in that. And we'll look at the correlation between breathing and the collection of chi or prana, which is life force. As you can see on my slide here, I will show you the biomechanics of respiration and how it influences the cerebral spinal fluid system, the nervous system, and how the entire respiratory mechanism actually works to create movement, energy, pumping, cleaning, and all the things I've previously discussed and more. We'll look, for example, at which exercises, if done at inappropriate times or done excessively, may induce challenges to the respiratory system by altering posture. If you alter the length-tension relationships in the body and you alter posture, there will be a direct and possibly negative effect on the respiratory system. And since the respiratory system is the chief system that keeps you alive, it might be interesting to look at some of the long-range ramifications of inappropriate or potentially damaging use of exercises that are disrupting respiratory function and physiology. In this workshop, I will show you the arthrokinematics of the spine and how the spine works as a fully integrated system with the extremities and the entire body at large. And once you understand how respiration works and how the spine works, you will be able to more easily identify postural imbalances that may be disrupting the respiratory system. And I will also show you very clearly how dysfunctions in the respiratory system commonly create postural imbalances and disruption to joints, tendons, ligaments, etc. In the program, I will share with you DeJarnette's three category system for recognizing when the musculoskeletal system is in compensation to support the respiratory system. And interestingly, I'll show you, for example, as you see on my screen here, how many disc bulges are actually the byproduct of faulty respiratory mechanics, but are seldom recognized to be the product of faulty respiratory mechanics, which leads people to perpetually try to treat the disc injury or joint injuries or muscle and tendon or ligament injuries as though they were actually the cause, when they're usually injuries of compensation for the respiratory system, which can easily happen when you consider that the average human being breathes 25,900 times a day. The next workshop will be Scientific Balance Training, a structured approach to long-term balance skills development. Same website, chekinstitute.com, same phone numbers to register. What we'll cover in that workshop is an understanding of how segmental and gross stabilization and posture are prerequisites for the development of long-term balance skills. We'll recognize that balancing is a skill, and because someone can perform complex balance acts does not assure that they have intrinsic balance or segmental stability, such as spinal joint or extremity joint stability, nor does it correlate with a reduced incidence of musculoskeletal dysfunction. Many people are under the false impression that because somebody can do amazing balance feats, that their body must be working well inside. I will show you why that's a dangerous assumption, particularly if you're one of those athletes. We will learn to prescribe specific balance training exercises based on your client's individual needs, the intrinsic and extrinsic demands of their environment, not the latest fad training methods. For me, FAD stands for forthcoming anatomical dysfunction. In my 26-year career as a therapist, I have had to treat injuries to numerous people who were using exercise techniques that were what I would call fad techniques. There's many of them out there right now on infomercials that are doing a lot of damage to people. What point is it to look good for 2 or 3 months and end up with an injury that might take you a year to recover from? This happens every day. I will show you how the outer unit muscle systems, sometimes referred to as muscle slings or sling systems, work to not only move the body, but to absorb energy from kinetic return and gravitational loading to actually make movement more efficient and to reduce the energetic cost of movement. And I'll show you that these sling systems cannot work properly unless there is musculoskeletal or static and dynamic postural balance in the body. We'll also talk about what it takes for these musculoskeletal systems or sling systems to work effectively. For example, we'll talk about the inner unit or the stabilizer systems depicted here by the spine, which is the mast of my little pirate ship, and how the inner unit systems or the stabilizer systems work with those large outer unit sling systems that we talked about, which are depicted here by guy wires A, B, and C. So here you see my kind of cute little picture of a sumo wrestler dancing. But in order for anybody to function optimally, there must be balance in these systems, and we'll look at how to accomplish that. I'll talk about how balance training begins in the womb and how essential infant development is to optimal posture and balance function in any work or sports environment. I'll talk about the issue of, does balance equal stability? In other words, do these great athletes doing these wild tricks really have stable bodies? I've worked with Danny Way since he was 19 years of age. That's about 16 years now, and we've worked together through all sorts of challenging injuries, but in that time he has set Guinness Book records 2 times and numerous championships to show for his great skill and our ability to use these techniques effectively, and I've worked with many more athletes just like him. So again, the Science of Breathing and Movement and Scientific Balance Training, October 29th and 30th at the Chek Institute. Feel free to call the Institute or visit chekinstitute.com. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. I'm Paul Chek. Bye-bye.